What's going on, my huggers and kissers? So today I want to talk about something a little bit different today. It's going to be kind of a more chill, relaxed yap session, if you will. So I was just scrolling on YouTube the other day and I saw a poll about, and this is going to be kind of just like a nerd out fest, okay? So if you're not a nerd, so it was basically about whose side are you on in terms of Captain America versus Tony Stark in Civil War. And it kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit when I saw a lot of discourse in the comment section. And when I clicked Tony's side, the poll won 60% to 40% versus Captain America's side. But when you look at the comment section actually resided in Captain America's side. And I thought the discourse was a little bit interesting. So I kind of wanted to talk about that today. So I chose Tony's side, right? And the reason I chose Tony's side is because just based off of the beginning of the film, right? We established that, you know, Bucky, who was previously a Hydra deviant, he was basically under the control of Hydra. And in that, right, he was basically not himself. And then later towards the film, we realized that Bucky was the one who ended up murdering Tony's parents, right? And when, you know, I looked at the comment section, a lot of people were talking about how they were sided with Captain America just based off of the governmental issues. Now, for me, okay, my perspective of it is like, regardless of said party, I think said party and variable overrides the fact of acting irrational. So let's break it down, right? So Iron Man wants government regulation, the Sokovia Accords, correct? And while that's, you know, good enough and everything, Captain America opposes it, and he more so prioritizes individual freedom. And I think that's a good moral standing, right? In Iron Man's perspective, right, government oversight and responsibility, it argues that you should take accountability for your actions, regardless of how you may feel that your individual beliefs are, right? So after the events of New York, right, when Loki came in and he, you know, destroyed half the city, and the other catastrophic events, you know, Age of Ultron, the superheroes needed regulation to prevent further destruction, and more so the collateral damage of the effects that they were actually going through. So Tony acknowledged like his personal guilt and responsibility, especially when he created Ultron, right? His desire for oversight comes from trying to right his wrongs, and that there should be boundaries, and the Accords are the best way to do so. The United Nations regulation is flawed, but it's actually fixable. Better than having rogue agents just cause more damage than there needs to be. Now, your counter argument, you know, the consequence of freedom, you know, Cap points out the free-for-all approach can be dangerous, right? And as we assume when like Bucky gets manipulated and used as a weapon, even though the most well-intentioned hero can be liable without proper controls, it doesn't go unsaid at what it can be, what it can do when unchecked. So Captain America's perspective, right? For freedom versus control. So Cap's stance is about trusting individuals to make the right decisions. And government control leads to corruption or misuse of power, which he does have validity, right? The Avengers needed autonomy to act swiftly and morally. Government bodies have agenda, and they make the use of the Avengers more of a political purpose and not necessarily for saving the lives or helping people. So the mistrust of bureaucracy. So Steve Rogers has lived through Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. He had to go through that in the beginning. We've seen that happening from the first Avenger, which makes him more, he naturally becomes more skeptical of a large government body. If a system like the Accords can be abused, heroes might be forced to do things against their morals, right? So the examples from history. So what if the Avengers are ordered to stand down against situations of, you know, a genocidal war crimes, right? So Captain America, he would argue that the responsibility should fall on the heroes themselves. If they act out of line, they should be held accountable, but they shouldn't be controlled by bureaucrats who don't understand the stakes. And that right there is where I can see the perspective, but in my eyes, right, is right. So in the beginning of the film, we get Tony and, you know, or sort of the middle of the film is when they had their big fight and their big battle. But in the very beginning, you get the anecdote of the lady who comes up to Tony and she, you know, she puts the picture of her son who was murdered in the battle against Ultron, right? And he was like some super graduate, you know, he was a really smart guy. You know, he was helping everyone. You know, he was just a really cool guy. He instead of you know, spending his time partying in college and stuff, he went out to help people and you know, do charitable work. And so when you look at it that perspective, right? When we see the discourse between the villain, obviously, versus the Avengers, the antagonist versus the protagonist, we get to see the real cause of it all. So here's kind of how I'm seeing it, right? It's like, even though the Avengers were obviously under a lot of scrutiny, Tony really thought of it from I think he thinks of it from more of a higher emotional intelligence perspective, where it's not really about themselves and that they have to take responsibility for themselves and how the discourse really treated the world and how it affected the world. Because even though you can argue that his perception of his emotional state, clouding his judgment, can be the result of misused power from governed bodies, I think that it resides in the civility of the Avengers themselves. Because you have to think about it, these are rogue superhuman, intelligent vigilantes who are capable of immense power. And so even though it can be misguided and misused, they still have the freedom to choose, even under a governed body. Like a police officer still has the right, even though it's a government worker, he still has the will to wield his own power, right? And they can't force them unless they kill the Avengers, you know, and they're not going to kill the Avengers. You really can't do that. So when we look at it, I think that when you look at it from that perspective, it really kind of takes away the underlying veil that gets pulled by saying that if the Avengers were under the scrutiny or the control of the government, that they wouldn't be able to make their own decisions, because they very much would be able to make their own decision. It's not like they would actually be under mind control, as if Bucky was truly under mind control. And we're going to get to that in a second. So you may argue which side was right. So balancing the safety of freedom, you can acknowledge the valence points in Iron Man pushing the oversight for might, protection, and the innocent lives of individuals around him, while Captain America's side insists of freedom and ensures the superheroes remain just heroes, not tools of the state. So if you're like me and you said Iron Man, you emphasize that the order and safety must come first, even if it means sacrificing some freedom for the greater good, which, if you side with Captain America, you highlight the freedom and morality responsibility, which are crucial in maintaining the essence of what make the heroes. No one should dictate a hero's consciousness, right? So the philosophical angle, which is from the Iron Man's perspective. So Iron Man as a utilitarian, right? Tony Stark represents the utilitarian philosophy, focusing on the greatest good for the greater number, right? So even if it means personal sacrifice or adhering to potential flawed authority, it still has a better moral ground standing than just thinking that your decisions not being governed or being oversight is better in the long run than, because we've seen the disaster that even their own decisions caused them in having to fight Thanos and whatnot, and where that led them. They had to go back in time. So Captain America as a deontologist, Steve Rogers would really follow the deontological approach, right? And he believes in acting according to moral principles, even if the outcome is uncertain or dangerous. And that, I feel like, it causes a haywire, sort of heinous existence in the power that they perceive. Because look, you can say you got A plus B equals C, right? And so A plus B equals C, and in the equation, the fight of the emotional state of which one. So you got A being the variable of said individual, B being the principle of what, or the energy of which said principle can affect said clause. So you have energy being the ability to do work, equaling the said C. So in the perspective of Captain America, though, it would be that A plus B equals C squared rooted. And that doesn't always equate to a better outcome of what can happen, because we've seen this happen many times where their emotional state actually caused more collateral damage than it should have previously, without governing bodies trying to seclude what could have possibly taken its state. So for example, when we seen Wanda in Sokovia, when she had to take the one mercenary, and Captain America said that he should have clocked when the mercenary was about to explode, right? And he was basically a suicide terrorist, and he wanted to blow up Captain America and come with them. Luckily, by the grace of God, Wanda was there to try to stop him, but unfortunately the collateral damage in which it caused was when she took the guy himself and used her power, her chaos magic, to uphold him. She couldn't contain him with the strength. Maybe it burned or hurt her. I don't know how her powers work, but she ended up sending him flying and actually blew up the building, which killed more civilians than actually would have been, because the main purpose of the mercenaries was that they needed to contain an actual anecdote. That was the main purpose. And so obviously that's very dangerous. But in the result of them trying to stop that and not being governed, or it being let known what was actually taking place, it actually caused the result of more civilians being injured than it should have been. And that aspect is something that I think is not being said, or not being thought through so vicariously in their actions. And so, as in the perspective of, I really think that Iron Man's perspective really comes from more of a more wisdom, a higher IQ thought process than the thought process of wanting to be your own individual. Because even a kid who's being rebellious, you know what I'm saying? You have to have punishment. As a kid, you have to have punishment. Even if you think that, your parent is mistreating you wrong, you still need that discipline to understand that the power that you wield is way stronger, especially as the individuals that they are, is way stronger than the power that they pose against all of society. And so when you look at it from that perspective, so on one's team we have, Vision, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Black Widow, and Tony Stark. I think that side comes with they're more think of it on a higher IQ perspective, because you can argue the fact that Tony's emotional intelligence to cloud his judgment from him not wanting to discipline him, or him wanting to discipline himself, which we see later in the film, results in his irrational decisions to want to attack Bucky from not knowing about Bucky being a controlled variable. If you were Iron Man, and I think that anybody in this perspective of Iron Man would definitely have the same irrational action or thought process in his mind to just attack said third party, because if you have A plus B, you have perspective of Captain America not only being disloyal to Tony, but also being dishonorable and deceiving Tony the entire time that he knew, because he knew that Bucky was the person who killed his parent. And anybody in their right mind knows that even if it was said variable did said thing, it doesn't even matter if they were in control, you just see red, right? Anybody would just see red. And so when it comes to that perspective, we say, or I say, it doesn't even become, so you got A plus B, A being Tony, B being said clause of Captain America being deceiving. And not only that, even in him telling that, he can't even him saying that Bucky was under control, he can't even trust him, because he doesn't even know if that's even the truth after knowing that he was lying to him the entire time. So I think that resides in an even better understanding of why Tony did what he did, and not the perspective of just coming at it with an actual rational, because it technically is irrational, but it coalesces with a rational action based on the fact that all parties involved have been deceptive, right? So Iron Man's guilt. Tony Stark feels responsible for many of the Avengers' mistakes, Ultron, Sokovia, etc. And he thinks the oversight will help prevent future tragedies. Cap's loyalty. Steve's refusal to compromise is deeply rooted in his loyalty to Bucky, but also in his belief that the Avengers must remain free. Now, some argue that Cap's decision is emotionally driven, while the others see it as a deep principle. A deep principle. The aftermath and consequences, which is another point. These point out how, the film shows the devastating consequences of division, friends becoming enemies, unintended collateral damage from, Rhodey's injury, and basically fracturing the Avengers fundamentally. And not to mention that the actual villain in the film, who was actually perpetrating all this to get the Avengers to crumble from the inside within. This was a beautifully written film, absolutely beautifully written. This was peak cinema, okay? How the eventual Thanos threat might have been handled better if the Avengers weren't torn apart by the debate that they had, So relating to the real world, tie Civil War debate to the real world issues like government, surveillance, privacy, and security. Can we trust the governments? I think that's the main question, or institutions with the power over individual freedoms. So in this aspect, I see it as, I don't think the Avengers are able to be entitled to the fact that even though that they believe that they are basically in higher power, which they are, they still reside as civilians of society. And so they, as vigilantes, can't sit here and pretend that they're a governed body, as they are still participating civilians, right? They aren't government official, right? A police officer works for the government and it works for the people, not the people working for, etc. Right? So they really are under judicial law and federal law to actually be under power. Like if the Avengers rule, they would have to be under law because they're just so powerful. And if we're looking at this in a practical sense, I don't think that the government would truly be sitting here holding back the Avengers. Like if Thanos pulls up, they're going to let them go. You know what I'm saying? I just think that the government would probably use them in aspects of war and committing war crimes and things of that nature, which Captain America does have a point there. But in terms of civilians being able to live their day-to-day lives and not have to worry about casualties, such as, the lady who comes up in the beginning of the film and shows her personal anecdote to Tony Stark about how their result in trying to save civilians actually ended up the result of dropping a building on somebody who truly was a beneficiary to society. So it brings up the question of how much control is too much. And, you bring up historical or current events where societies have been held who have had to decide between freedom or security, mirroring the Civil War conflict. And if you look at it, both sides truly do have merit. But in a world of gods, alien, and super-powered beings, can we afford freedom, or is the control the only way to survive? And that question kind of underlies in I feel like in a philosophical sense and in a real sense. I think that Vision being a supercomputer, super wise, he literally has an infinity stone in his freaking nozzle, and T'Challa being one of the most smart moguls, a trillionaire, he gets his power from an astral projection of Wakanda, and Rhodey obviously being Captain America's companion, and also Spider-Man also being a very smart individual. I think that it really does reside in more of a higher intelligence, because when you look at it from just the outside looking, and when you look at it just like face front, right, face value, it does look like Tony and Tony and the rest of the people who will fight for that side are coming at it from an emotional standpoint. But I think it's the emotional intelligence standpoint in which that becomes a higher clause compared to the dishonorary, disloyal, and heinous actions from Captain America, who didn't really reside in the power of wanting to take consequence from his actions, because his inconsequential decision making was the result of so many people being hurt. Like when he said that he should have clocked the mercenary when he blew up. That right there should be his prime example to understand that his emotional, or his lack of not being able to understand that his unstrategic thought process in going in to try to stop said villain or party, to stop them from getting said anecdote, was the result of more people being injured. Even though they did get the job done, it was basically basically halfway done. You know, it was a half-assing, because they never actually, it's not that they never did anything, but they ended up hurting more, and the collateral damage was even more consequential. And not only this also resulted in T'Chaka being blown and passing away, through Bucky also being still under the control of Hydra. And we only learn this later on in the film, once Bucky becomes consciousness and loses the bravado that he once had. And the result of all this, I think that Captain America definitely had, or I think that Tony Stark definitely had the better side. I think that when I first saw the film and I thought about it, I thought that Captain America truly was the better individual. But as I started to really think about it and articulate it in my brain, I realized that it becomes from a more emotional, high intelligence aspect, and a more of a higher IQ thought process from, you know, even Vision. I think Vision really gives the bigger aspect of what we're truly trying to do, because Captain America really resides in it being thrown in the air, and we don't know if the government's going to do that. We don't know if it's, but we can say for certain at the time of the result that many people were in harm's way of the Avengers trying to stop, because even in them trying to do good, they definitely did a lot worse than the perspectives of which they probably thought that they were doing. But I don't know, man. That's kind of what I really want to talk about today. Bit of a weird topic. This is kind of like a deep dive. I really thought about this, and I think that side probably resided in a little bit more of a deeper understanding of their power. It's really about their power and how much power they have an effect on society as a whole. And this was back when films were actually good and watchable, palpable. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. If you think that one side is different than the other, or if you think that one side is better than the other, I don't know. But that being said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I think it's a very good debacle to get into. But let me know your thoughts. If you think Captain America took a better perspective, or if you think that Tony did, let me know. And yep, turn on the notification bell, like the video, all that for the YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you when you're older. Bye.